What happens when one of the most beloved musicians in history sits down for what should be a friendly chat, only to discover the host has a completely different agenda? Tonight, we're diving into the explosive confrontation between Ringo Starr and Jimmy Kimmel that shocked everyone in that studio. The tension was palpable from the moment Ringo walked onto that stage. You could see it in his eyes. The way he carried himself, something was already off. But nobody, and I mean nobody, expected what was about to unfold. "Ringo Starr, everybody," Jimmy announced with his trademark grin. But there was something different about it tonight, something almost predatory. "The legendary drummer of the Beatles, thanks for being here." Ringo settled into his chair, adjusting his signature sunglasses. "Happy to be here, Jim." "Now, Ringo, I have to ask—" Jimmy leaned forward, that smile never leaving his face. "Do you ever get tired of living in the shadow of your more talented bandmates?" The audience gasped. You could hear a pin drop in that studio. Ringo's face went completely still. "Excuse me?" Ringo's voice was calm, but you could feel the ice forming. "Oh, come on," Jimmy chuckled, waving his hand dismissively. "I mean, let's be honest here. Paul was the pretty one, John was the genius, George was the quiet mystic, and you were just, well, the drummer who got lucky." The camera caught Ringo's jaw tightening. His hands, those famous hands that had kept time for the greatest band in history, slowly clenched into fists on his knees. "Jimmy, I think you might have me confused with someone else," Ringo said, his Liverpool accent thickening slightly. "I've been making music for over 60 years. Right, Jimmy nodded mockingly. "But let's talk about what everyone's really thinking. The Beatles would have been just fine with any drummer, wouldn't they? I mean, how hard is it really to go boom, boom, pow?" Jimmy actually mimicked playing drums with his hands, making exaggerated faces at the audience, who were now shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Some nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, but most people just looked horrified. Ringo removed his sunglasses slowly, folding them with deliberate precision. When he looked up, his eyes were sharp as steel. "You know what, Jimmy? I've done thousands of interviews in my life. I've sat with everyone from Dick Cavett to David Letterman to Conan O'Brien. And not once, has anyone been disrespectful enough to sit there and tell me I don't deserve what I've earned." "Oh, don't get all sensitive on me now," Jimmy shot back, his voice dripping with fake concern. "I'm just asking the questions everyone else is too polite to ask. Isn't that what good television is about? Getting to the truth? The truth?" Ringo leaned back in his chair, a bitter smile playing on his lips. "You want the truth, Jimmy? The truth is you're sitting there trying to tear down a man who's brought joy to millions of people. And for what? A few cheap laughs from your audience?" The audience was dead silent now. You could feel the energy in that room shifting, turning against Jimmy, but he just kept pushing. "Look, I'm not trying to tear you down," Jimmy said, throwing his hands up in mock innocence. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. The Beatles were about Lennon and McCartney. They wrote the songs, they sang the leads. They were the creative force. You just sat in the back and hit things." Ringo stood up abruptly, his chair rolling back slightly. The studio crew froze. Security started moving closer to the stage. "Just hit things?" Ringo's voice was dangerously quiet now. "Jimmy, do you have any idea what you're talking about? Do you know anything about rhythm? About what it takes to hold 4 different musical personalities together? Do you understand that without a solid drummer, those songs you love so much would have fallen apart?" Okay, Jimmy held up his hands, but that smirk was still there. "Don't get your drumsticks in a twist. I'm just having some fun here." "Fun?" Ringo's voice rose for the first time. "You think insulting someone to their face on national television is fun? You think trying to diminish a lifetime of work is entertainment?" The camera panned to the audience, and you could see people looking genuinely upset. Some were shaking their heads, others were whispering to each other. This wasn't the Jimmy Kimmel show they were used to. "Come on, Ringo," Jimmy said, leaning back in his chair like he was enjoying this. "You can't tell me you don't know what people say. Ringo Starr, he drew out the name mockingly. The luckiest man in rock and roll. Right place, right time, am I right?" Ringo walked closer to Jimmy's desk, and for a moment it looked like he might actually reach across and grab the host by his tie. "Let me tell you something, Jimmy Kimmel," Ringo said, his finger pointed directly at the host. "I didn't get lucky. I got chosen. John, Paul, and George chose me because I was the best drummer for their music. Not because I was available, not because I was convenient, but because I could play what they needed played." "Sure, sure," Jimmy waved him off again. "But be honest, any decent session musician could have done what you did. I bet if we brought in some random drummer from the street right now, they could play those Beatles songs just fine." That was it. That was the moment everything changed. Ringo's face went completely red, and his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire studio. "Get up!" "What?" Jimmy's smirk faltered for the first time. "I said get up. Stand up, Jimmy." Jimmy laughed nervously, looking around at his crew, but nobody was laughing with him anymore. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. "Get up," Ringo repeated, "and let's see if you can even keep a simple beat. Let's see if you can do what any random drummer from the street can do." Jimmy's face was starting to lose color. "Ringo, come on. I'm just the host here. This is just television, you know?" "No, no, no." Ringo shook his head. "You don't get to hide behind that now. You made this personal the minute you decided to attack my career, my talent, my contribution to something beautiful that brought happiness to the world. So stand up, take these drumsticks," Ringo pulled out a pair of sticks from his jacket pocket, "and show me how easy it is." The tension in that room was unbearable. Jimmy was trapped, and everyone knew it. Jimmy's eyes darted around the studio, like a cornered animal. His writers were gesturing frantically from the wings, but there was no script for this, no cue cards that could save him now. "Look, Ringo!" Jimmy tried to force that familiar laugh, but it came out strained and artificial. "I think you're taking this a little too seriously. This is comedy, right? We're just having some laughs here." "Comedy?" Ringo's voice was ice cold. "Making fun of someone's life work is comedy to you? Trying to tear down everything I've built is your idea of entertainment?" The drumsticks were still extended toward Jimmy, who was now visibly sweating under the studio lights. His usual confidence had completely evaporated. "Come on," Jimmy stammered. "Everyone knows I'm just a comedian. Nobody takes what I say seriously. It's all just jokes, right, audience?" He turned to the crowd desperately, but the response was lukewarm at best. A few scattered claps, some uncomfortable murmurs, but mostly just silence. These people had come to see their favorite talk show host, not watch him humiliate a beloved icon. "You know what your problem is, Jimmy." Ringo stepped closer to the desk, those drumsticks still in his outstretched hand. "You hide behind that word comedy, like it gives you permission to be cruel, like it makes hurting people acceptable." "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," Jimmy protested, but his voice was getting higher, more defensive. "I'm just, pushing buttons. That's what comedians do. We say the things other people are thinking but won't say." "Other people?" Ringo looked around the studio, then back at Jimmy. "Look at your audience, Jimmy. Look at their faces. Do they look like they're thinking what you're saying? Or do they look embarrassed for you?" The camera panned across the audience again, and it was devastating. People were literally covering their faces with their hands. Others were shaking, their heads in disgust. A few had actually gotten up to leave. Jimmy noticed it too, and you could see panic starting to set in. "Okay, look, maybe I came on a little strong," he said, trying to backtrack. "But you have to admit, there's some truth to what I'm saying. Drummers are kind of the The least important member of the band, right? Wrong thing to say. Completely wrong thing to say. Ringo slammed his hand down on Jimmy's desk so hard that the coffee mug jumped. The least important? Jimmy, do you know what happens to a song without rhythm? Do you know what music sounds like when four people are playing at four different tempos? I just meant— No, you don't get to explain what you meant, Ringo cut him off. You meant exactly what you said. You think what I do is easy. You think anyone could do it. So prove it. Jimmy was now literally pressed back in his chair, as far away from Ringo as he could get. I don't know how to play drums, Ringo. I never claimed to know how to play drums. Exactly. Ringo's voice boomed through the studio. You don't know how to play drums. You don't understand music. You don't understand rhythm. But you felt qualified to sit there and tell me and everyone watching that what I've dedicated my life to is worthless. The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Jimmy's band leader, who had been silent this whole time, was now looking down at his shoes, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. Jimmy, Ringo continued, his voice now eerily calm, I want you to think about something. I want you to imagine if I came to your job and told everyone that being a talk show host is easy, that anyone could do it, that you're just lucky to be sitting in that chair. But that's different, Jimmy stammered. I mean, this is just a job. What you did with the Beatles, that's art and history and— So you do understand, Ringo interrupted, a thin smile crossing his face. You do understand that what I did mattered. You do understand that it took skill and talent and years of practice, but you decided to pretend you didn't understand any of that just to get a reaction. Jimmy was trapped in his own words now, and everyone could see it. His face was red, sweat was beading on his forehead, and his usual quick wit had completely deserted him. Look, I'm sorry if I offended you, Jimmy said, but it sounded hollow, rehearsed. I really didn't mean anything by it. It's just television, you know. It's just entertainment. Just entertainment? Ringo shook his head slowly. Jimmy, do you know how many young drummers are watching this right now? Do you know how many kids who are learning to play music just heard you tell them that their instrument doesn't matter? That they don't matter? For the first time, Jimmy looked genuinely uncomfortable with what he had done, but instead of apologizing sincerely, he doubled down. Come on, don't make this bigger than it is, Jimmy said, his voice taking on a slightly nasty edge. You're acting like I insulted your mother or something. I made a few jokes about drumming. Big deal. The audience actually gasped at that. Even Jimmy's most loyal fans in the crowd couldn't believe what they were hearing. Ringo stepped back from the desk, and for a moment Jimmy looked relieved. But then Ringo started laughing, a low, bitter laugh that was somehow more frightening than his anger had been. You know what, Jimmy? You're right. This is just television. This is just entertainment. So let me entertain your audience. Ringo turned to face the crowd directly, ignoring Jimmy completely. Ladies and gentlemen, Ringo said, his voice now projecting clearly through the studio, I've been making music for over 60 years. I've played with some of the greatest musicians who ever lived. I've been part of songs that made people fall in love, that helped them through hard times, that brought families together. The audience was hanging on every word now, completely captivated. But tonight, Ringo continued, I've learned something new. I've learned that there are people in this world who think that tearing others down is entertainment. People who think that humiliating someone on television is comedy. He turned back to Jimmy, who was now looking genuinely scared. Jimmy, you wanted to know if any drummer could play those Beatles songs. Well, let me ask you something else. Could any talk show host have created the music that's still bringing joy to people 50 years later? Could any comedian have been part of something that changed the world? Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. I didn't think so, Ringo said quietly. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to walk off this stage now, and you're going to sit there and think about what you've done. And maybe, just maybe, you'll realize that some things are more important than getting a cheap laugh." Ringo started to turn away, but then he stopped and looked back at Jimmy one more time. "Oh, and Jimmy, next time you want to insult someone's life work on national television, maybe pick on someone who can't defend themselves, because I've been dealing with critics and doubters my whole career, and I'm not about to let some talk show host make me feel small." The silence in that studio was deafening as Ringo began walking toward the edge of the stage. But Jimmy couldn't let it end there. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was his ego. Or maybe he genuinely thought he could still salvage this disaster. But as Ringo reached the edge of the stage, Jimmy's voice rang out across the studio. "Running away, Ringo? Just like you ran away from the Beatles when things got tough?" Ringo stopped dead in his tracks. The entire studio seemed to freeze. Even the cameramen stopped moving. Slowly, very slowly, Ringo turned around. When he faced Jimmy again, his expression was unlike anything anyone in that room had ever seen. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something much more dangerous. "What did you just say?" Ringo's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the dead silence like a gunshot. Jimmy realized immediately that he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "I said what I said. When the Beatles broke up, when things got complicated, you just walked away. Just like you're walking away now." The audience was in complete shock. Several people were actually covering their mouths, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Ringo walked back toward Jimmy's desk, and with each step, his voice got quieter and more controlled, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Jimmy, you have 10 seconds to take that back." "Take what back?" Jimmy tried to sound defiant, but his voice was shaking now. "The truth? That when your bandmates needed you, most when they were fighting and struggling, you just quit. 9 seconds. Jimmy's producer was frantically gesturing from off stage, probably telling him to cut to commercial, to end this nightmare, but Jimmy seemed completely oblivious to everything except the man walking toward him. "What are you going to do, Ringo? Hit me? On live television? That'll really show everyone how mature and professional you are." 8 seconds. "You know what?" Jimmy stood up from his desk, his own anger finally boiling over. "I'm tired of tiptoeing around your feelings. You want the truth? Here's the truth. The Beatles were the greatest band in history despite having you as their drummer, not because of it." 7 seconds. "John Lennon was a genius. Paul McCartney was a genius. George Harrison was underrated but brilliant. And you? You were just the guy who happened to be there when they needed someone to keep time." 6 seconds. The security guards were moving closer now, but they seemed unsure of what to do. This wasn't a physical altercation, not yet, but the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. 5 seconds, Jimmy. "And another thing," Jimmy continued, seemingly unable to stop himself now. "All those solo albums you made after the Beatles? Nobody cares about them. Nobody remembers them. Without John and Paul writing your songs, you were nothing." 4 seconds. Jimmy's band leader had actually left his position and was walking off stage. Several crew members were backing away. Even Jimmy's own people were abandoning him. 3 seconds. "So go ahead, Ringo," Jimmy said, spreading his arms wide in a gesture of false bravado. "Prove me wrong. Show everyone that you're more than just a lucky drummer who rode other people's talent to fame." 2 seconds. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of this train wreck in high definition. The audience was completely silent, many of them looking genuinely frightened by what they were witnessing. 1 second. Jimmy opened, his mouth to say something else, probably another insult, another cheap shot, but Ringo held up his hand. "Time's up, Jimmy." What happened next was not what anyone expected. Ringo didn't lose his temper. He didn't shout. He didn't make any sudden movements. Instead, he did something far more devastating. He laughed. It started as a quiet chuckle, But it grew and grew until Ringo was laughing so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes. The sound echoed through the studio, and it was genuinely unnerving because everyone could tell it wasn't the laughter of someone who found something funny. It was the laughter of someone who had just realized something profound and terrible. "You know what, Jimmy?" Ringo said when he finally stopped laughing. "I almost feel sorry for you." Jimmy looked confused, thrown off by this unexpected reaction. "Sorry for me? Why would you feel sorry for me?" "Because this is who you are," Ringo said, gesturing around the studio. "This is your legacy. This is what people are going to remember about Jimmy Kimmel. Not the funny interviews, not the comedy sketches, not the charitable work you might have done. They're going to remember the night you tried to destroy a 70-year-old man on live television for no reason other than your own amusement." Jimmy's face was getting redder by the second. "That's not, people understand that this is just what? Just comedy? Just entertainment?" Ringo shook his head. "Jimmy, look around this room. Look at your audience. Look at your own crew. Do any of them look entertained? Do any of them look like they're having fun?" The camera panned across the studio and it was brutal. The audience looked horrified. The crew looked embarrassed. Even Jimmy's security guards looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. "But here's the really sad part, Jimmy," Ringo continued, his voice now filled with something that sounded almost like pity. "I'm going to leave here tonight, and I'm going to go home to my family. I'm going to wake up tomorrow still being Ringo Starr, still having been part of the Beatles, still having made music that will outlive both of us. But you're going to wake up tomorrow knowing that you spent an entire evening trying to tear down someone who never did anything to hurt you." Jimmy finally seemed to realize how badly he had miscalculated. "Look, Ringo, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Maybe we can start over, have a real conversation." "Start over?" Ringo looked genuinely amazed. "Jimmy, you just spent the last 20 minutes telling me that my life's work was worthless, that I was lucky, that I was nothing without my bandmates. You told me that nobody cares about my music, that any random person could do what I do. And now you want to start over?" "I was just trying to make good television," Jimmy said desperately. "You know how it is, sometimes you have to push people to get interesting reactions." "Interesting reactions," Ringo repeated slowly. "Is that what you call this? An interesting reaction?" "Jimmy, you didn't push me to get a reaction. You attacked me because you thought it would be funny. You thought tearing down someone who's brought joy to millions of people would make for good television." The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Finally, Ringo spoke again. "You know what the difference is between us, Jimmy? When I make music, I try to make people happy. When you make television, apparently, you try to make people miserable." Jimmy made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Come on, Ringo, don't be so dramatic. We're just two guys having a conversation. This is what talk shows are about, right? Getting to know each other, having some laughs." "Having some laughs?" Ringo's voice was incredulous. "At whose expense, Jimmy? At mine? At every drummer who's watching this and wondering if their contributions to music don't matter? At every musician who's ever been told they're not important?" "I never said musicians aren't important," Jimmy protested weakly. "You said I wasn't important," Ringo replied. "You said what I do doesn't matter. You said anyone could do it. And when I challenged you to prove it, when I offered to let you show everyone how easy it is, what did you do? You hid behind excuses." The executive producer was now on stage, whispering urgently in Jimmy's ear, probably telling him to end this, to cut to commercial, to do anything to stop the bleeding. But it was too late. The damage was done. Ringo looked directly into the main camera, speaking to the audience at home. "Ladies and gentlemen, I came here tonight to talk about music, to share some stories, to have a good time. Instead, I've been reminded that there are people in this world who think that cruelty is entertainment, who think that tearing others down is somehow acceptable if you call it comedy. He turned back to Jimmy one final time. "Jimmy, I hope you learn something from this. I hope you realize that the power you have as a television host comes with responsibility. People trust you to treat your guests with respect, to make them feel welcome, to celebrate their achievements rather than mock them." Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, but Ringo held up his hand again. "I'm leaving now, Jimmy, and I want you to sit there and think about what you've done. Think about whether this is really the kind of person you want to be. Think about whether making one old musician feel bad was worth destroying your own reputation." And with that, Ringo Starr walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving behind a stunned audience, a humiliated host, and a moment of television that would be talked about for years to come.